Okay, so let's check out the other way you could record and then reamp. Now remember, your rig input, when you're recording, you're going to want to make sure it's on guitar because that's the guitar input on the 11 rack. Then you come to user options. Now your digital outs, this is going to be split in, out. Now you can also change this on the 11 rack itself. So, to change this on the rack itself, you'd hold your edit back button. You'd go to digital outputs, which is right there. And here's your outputs. It's on split in, split out because we already changed it on the 11 rack window in Pro Tools. But here's where you change that. Split in, split out. You can also change, of course, your rig input here. Sorry. You can also change your rig input on the rack itself. It's on guitar because, again, we changed it. But you can change all this stuff right here as well. Alright. Remember, you can change it on the rack or you can change it from the window right here, which is really nice. And Pro Tools at this point has to be open for you to use this here. Again, we're set on to split in, split out. Now I'm just going to mute all these. And I'm going to create a couple new tracks. We'll just say 2. And then 2 stereo. I don't need them all, but I'll just create them. Alright. So now for our input. It's going to be SPDIF left right. This is a stereo track. Another way you can do this is use 2 mono tracks. SPDIF left, and this will be SPDIF right. So now let's see what happens when we record and enable these tracks and test them out. Okay, so now let's check out what happens when we record and enable these 2 tracks here, which remember, this is SPDIF left, this is SPDIF right. These are both mono tracks. So record and enable this one. Let's hear how it sounds. So that's the dirty sound. So what does the right sound like? Well, let's see. As you can hear, that's the clean sound. That's the dry sound. So, you could also record like this. Record and enable both these tracks. You'd probably want to put this one on mute so as not to get distracted by the dry sound. That way we just have the dirty. Okay, so now we have these both record enabled. I have this dry track here muted. Pull this over so you can see what's going on here. Remember, this is the wet signal. This is the dry signal. So let's just record a little something. So you can clearly see that this is the dirty signal or the wet signal. This is the dry signal. Let's take these off record enable. Let's take this off mute. Let's just hit play. Alright, so now say we have that recorded, you're at the end of your record and you want to reamp. You say, that sounds okay, but maybe I'd like to change that preset to something else. No, not that one. We'll choose a different one. We'll say we want to change it to something like this. Alright, so how do you set that up? Well, it's pretty much the same thing. So what you'd want to do, let's get that out of the way. We'll move this. Since we want to reamp, we'll just end up redoing the steps we did back here. This is our dirty, this is our dry. This is the track we want to use to reamp. So we're going to change the output. Let's just make it SPDIF right. And let's put that into, another mono track. We'll just use this one here. Let's pull that over. So now we're going to change the input of this track to SPDIF right. Now remember, you're going to want to change your rig input, because if it's on guitar, you're not going to hear anything. Change it to digital right or digital left right. We'll just do digital right. And of course we'll record and enable this track. We'll mute our wet track. Remember, this is our dry track right here. So did you see what I did wrong there? What you want to make sure you always remember is you go back to your user options and your outputs. We're on split in, split out still. We want to change that to rig outputs. Otherwise we're just going to get the dry signal. Or if you're using the left, you would just get the wet signal. So what we want is rig outputs. There we go. And remember, you can also change all these settings on the 11 rack itself. So now let's hit play and see what we get. And here's our original wet track. So now we have both. So there you go. Now you have a couple different ways you can easily reamp, even though you're connected to another audio interface, like the 003 or the 002. It's very easy, it's very simple to set up. You just kind of have to remember a couple things. You always want to pay attention to your rig input for whatever you're doing. If you're recording, you'll make sure it's on guitar. If you're reamping, you want to choose whatever output is appropriate. And also remember on your outputs here, if you're doing split in out, you're going to need to be changing this here back to rig outputs. So just remember those little things. Remember, if you're going to use the 3 cable method, or if you want to call it the 4 cable to include the USB cable, then you're going to need to change this as well. Make sure rig input is chosen so you can reamp the way we did previously. So there you go, that about wraps it up. Just try it out a couple times. Try out each way. Choose the one you like to do best, and you'll probably find you prefer one over the other, or you may end up using both. Another thing that's pretty cool you can do, as long as you have that dry track, if you have other guitar amp sims, such as, let's see here, say you have Amplitube. So now you can take Amplitube and you can load up the preset. Say you want something extreme. Let's just choose something here. So now, if we play this track, it's going to be playing through Amplitube. This can also work, of course, if you have the 11 plug-in. So here we have the 11 plugin open, and you'll notice that, of course, 11 plugin does not include all these effects. Now, sometime in the future they were to include all these effects in the 11 plugin, reamping would be super easy, much easier than it is now, because you could literally audition all day long easily right in the box without having to send signal out and in and re-record or anything like that. You could easily just put 11 or your amp simulator of choice right on the dry track and leave it like that if that's what you prefer, or you could take it and you can use the audio suite version and you could commit that sound to that track. Just always make sure you have a backup of your dry sound, so you'd copy or duplicate the track, or you could make another playlist as well. So say you wanted to choose something in the rack. This is just 11 itself. So you can see, if you have the 11 plugin and in the future they were to include all the effects, there would really be no need to send the signal back out into the rack and then back in. You could do it all right in the box, which would be very nice. But currently that is not an option, so you'll have to reamp in the ways I've described. Of course, another way to reamp is if you're just using the 11 rack on its own. You could just choose reamp and follow the instructions in the book. So I hope that clears things up for everybody. It's not that hard. It takes a little bit of practice to remember what your settings are, what they should be, and what you want to do. It's very easy to reamp with the 11 rack, even when it's connected to, say, an 003 or an 002 or similar device via SPDIF. Okay, so that wraps up the reamping tutorials when you have the 11 rack hooked up to another device via SPDIF. So now you know a couple different ways that you can reamp besides just the standard way of reamping when you're using the 11 rack on its own. So now you know the 3 cable method, or if you want to call it the 4 cable method, which would include the USB cable, which would be 2 SPDIF cables, 1 audio cable, and then of course the USB cable. And you also know the split in, split out method, where you're just using the SPDIF signal. Well, if you watched all these tutorials, you should be good to go. So you better get out, start rocking, and don't forget, when you're playing with the 11 rack, you got to turn it up to 11. Because if you don't, you're probably a horrible person.